morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Coffee and Something Stronger. My name is Cody Norred. I'm the Director of Programs and Policy at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. And with me this morning is going to be Reverend Jenny Phillips. Coffee and Something Stronger is a coffee chat style interview show where we talk with faith leaders, academics, clergy, different grassroots practitioners in the realm of sustainability on issues of faith, environmental justice, climate change, and emerging social issues of our time. So, Reverend Phillips, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks for letting me be here.
Of course. Reverend Jenny Phillips is the Senior Technical Advisor for Environmental Sustainability at the United Methodist General Board of Global Ministries, and also serves on the Advisory Council for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, and so has been a good friend to Gipple and a good colleague in this work. And so, Reverend Phillips, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure, yeah. So as Cody shared, I work with Global Ministries, which is the mission agency of the United Methodist Church. We send missionaries, we do humanitarian relief and response through the United Methodist Committee on Relief, and we're getting more and more deeply engaged in creation care ministries. I'm an elder in the United Methodist Church. My home conference is the Pacific Northwest Conference in Seattle, but I've been in the Atlanta area for 3 years now, and I'm enjoying living in the South.
Great, thanks so much. We're going to dive into some of your work in a little bit, but I think you have a reading for us this morning.
Yeah,
so I'll let you offer that before we get started.
Great. This is a reading from The Bell and the Blackbird, a book of poetry by David White. It's called Just Beyond Yourself. Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be. Half a step into self-forgetting, and the rest restored by what you'll meet. There's a road always beckoning. When you see the two sides of it closing together at that far horizon, and deep in the foundations of your own heart at exactly the same time. That's how you know it's the road you have to follow. That's how you know it's where you have to go. That's how you know you have to go. That's how you know. Just beyond yourself. It's where you need to be.
Thank you for that. There's a lot in there, but I'll ask you, why is that important, and why did you want to bring that this morning?
It's important because I think that we all need to go just beyond ourselves in this moment where we are experiencing a global health crisis and a global climate crisis and a reckoning over racism in the United States. I think that we're all called by this moment to stretch beyond ourselves, stretch beyond our comfort zones to become and live into something just beyond where we are now. And if we all could create that space for ourselves to do that and support one another in stepping out, we could do a lot of good.
Yeah, to follow up on that, what are some of the ways that you feel like you're trying to push beyond yourself? And maybe what are some ways that congregations or clergy or other lay leaders can think about how they might push beyond themselves and get to kind of a place where they know how they should do that?
I think for me, it's about stepping outside of my comfort zone and taking risks, knowing that I might screw up. And it's hard at this moment in time to screw up in front of other people and screw up publicly in what you're calling for or what you're trying to do, because there's an increase in this call out culture that is quick to name and shame, even when intentions are good. And so to get grounded enough in yourself to know your own heart and intentions and to know where you're called to be, even if you don't know how to get there, is really important for sustaining yourself on the journey. So, and there are intersections here. I've shared with you, Cody, that I work on a program where we're trying to create a more anti-racist program for a training that we do in the United Methodist Church, helping people engage in environmental projects in their communities. I don't know if you want to just start going into that, but that feels like I feel like I'm ready to launch
Yeah,
into that
yeah,
here.
we're getting there. Oh, I want to wait on it until I
Okay,
ask you
okay.
about the program generally, but I'll let you
Yeah.
finish and then I'll push us elsewhere.
Yeah, so I think that when we're looking at, in some ways we have so much information about what we want, what the world needs to be like and what's going on that's wrong now. And I think the challenge is deciding for oneself and one's community, with one's community, how do we actually step into that new thing? I mean, there's a reason we're not there yet. It's not comfortable, and we don't quite know how and where we fit into it. And so um, I think just building our resilience internally through our spiritual lives, through our communities. I feel like I'm talking really broadly and vaguely, Cody, but it's a general thing that I think we can get more specific about as we deepen conversation about
Yeah,
the work.
thanks for that. It's a beautiful poem. How, as a person who's been grounded in Methodism for a while, do you feel like the sort of theologies and traditions within Methodism help you do your work better in the realm of creation, care, and environmental justice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's so interesting is that in the United Methodist Church, I'll often encounter people who, when they hear about the work that we're doing at Global Ministries or some of the creation care work happening at other agencies in the church, they'll be like, wow, I didn't know the United Methodist Church had anything to say about the environment. And in fact, we say a lot about the environment. A lot of work over generations has gone into creating or drawing on a Christian worldview about the relationship between people and the earth and God. And we have really, there are deep and rich resources in our tradition to support the care for God's creation. I want to share with you two bits. One from our social principles, which is
Great.
a set of resources that helps United Methodists think about the values that shape the way we engage with the world around us. And the first section of the social principles is about our relationship with the natural world. So this is like primary to who we are and how we are called to engage with the world. Um, and you can find this, if you're a Methodist, in either our Book of Discipline or the Book of Resolutions. It's in both places, paragraph 160. All creation is the Lord's, and we are responsible for the ways in which we use and abuse it. Water, air, soil, minerals, energy, resources, plants, animal life, and space are to be valued and conserved because they are God's creation and not solely because they are useful to human beings. God has granted us stewardship of creation. We should meet these stewardship duties through acts of loving care and respect. And then it goes on to speak to our relationship to water and air and soil, to energy resources, to animal life, to climate stewardship, to space, to science, to food. I mean, it really it really runs the gamut. And it's an underutilized resource, in my opinion, for shaping how we order the life of the church. I also want to share a brief piece from the Global Ministries Theology of Mission, the theology that undergirds the work of our agency. There's a portion of the Theology of Mission that states active faith participates in the perfecting and fulfilling grace of God, which claims and implements the promises of God to deliver exploited persons and oppressed peoples, to restore the sanctity and integrity of God's creation, and to reconcile division in the households of faith and among the peoples and nations of all the earth, as all the creation groans for redemption. The Wesleyan expectation of perfection in love draws redeemed individuals into appropriate, active, transforming relationships of wholeness and unity with God, all people, and creation. So we have these
Pretty
rich
good.
resources that really name this relationship of who we are in relationship to the earth, in relationship to God, that the creation is called toward redemption in the same way that people are called toward redemption, and that we are to love the earth and God loves the earth as God loves us.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Um, it's so clear almost when you read those two pieces from the tradition. I'm
Mhm.
curious, how do you, in the work that you do, you're probably working with a wide range of people. Some people who really appreciate this work and have been in this work for a long time. Some people who have never done this work. Some people who've never heard of this work, but are
Mhm.
engaged in the church at a variety of levels. And so, how do you help make the connections clear for people that caring for creation and caring for neighbor are very linked, with some of the environmental
Mhm.
injustices that we see, and kind of getting people to dip their toe into this work?
Yeah. I think some of it is sharing the information, providing the resources that people may not be aware of, and naming those links that people may not be aware of about the connection between loving creation and loving one's neighbor. And then I think a key part of breaking down those barriers that we run into, I think one of the big barriers is fear and anxiety about what might change, and how, whether it's about cost or the way we live, the way we do things. I think it's really important to cast a vision for what things can be like, and walk people through change, both the grief that comes with change sometimes, but also the hope and potential. Just as one concrete example, I think people are stunned to realize what's possible with the information that can be gained through an energy audit, which is something I know you work with congregations a lot, and the financial savings that are possible through an energy audit and interventions recommended through an energy audit. People sometimes have an idea that changes are going to be too unwieldy, too expensive, too challenging, and it's true that some take more. There's some are a heavier lift than others, but sort of beginning to engage people in what's possible through change, I think, can help ease them into new ways of being in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I was just having a conversation with Manav, who just got onboarded to our board and
Yeah.
works with Subswala, and we were talking about this. Often there's this contradictory notion that you can either do good business or you can be sustainable and think about the environment. And his
Mhm.
whole point is like, no, no, no. If you do, you cannot do either without the other. Actually, that to
Right.
do good business is to do environmentally just things, and vice versa. Exactly what you're saying. That you can actually make some
Mhm.
investments to do good business as a
Mhm.
congregation that doesn't have to put you in a financial hole necessarily, but can actually give you dividends on caring for the things you're supposed to care about.
Yeah.
So,
And like understanding, as you said, that the connection between caring for creation and caring for our neighbor means sustaining the resources of creation for the long term. So when you're thinking about mission, it means that you're not that the work isn't just about direct aid for a specific situation, but it's about helping to support conditions that allow all life to thrive.
yeah, yes. And um, the other side of the coin too is often people do complain about cost, and having
Hmm.
a genuine conversation about how we have kind of a society and economic system that doesn't recognize the true cost of things. So things appear very, very
Yes.
cheap when in fact they're not.
Right.
And we have a kind of a spiritual obligation to do the work to care about those things and challenge those systems. So
Hmm.
yes, it might be
Yes.
cheaper to use styrofoam, but the impact of that is much larger than the dollar that you pay for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's the same, we struggle with that around the environmental impacts, around social impacts, about the products we use and the labor we employ as faith communities. So I think all of that, like, it's also valuable to sort of name a larger picture, and make faith communities a place where it's okay to bring those values to the table, because I think there's so much resistance to that in the world, that we so highly value cheapness overall. that having a faith community be a place where you can kind of experiment with what it means to implement your values through your economic decisions is really a cool thing.
You actually have the power to shape the world around you. You don't have to just say yes, you
Yeah.
can actually change it.
Yes, and because you're part of a faith community that in some cases is part of a larger denomination or connected with an organization like Interfaith Power and Light, you really together can have a much larger impact.
Well, in that vein, why don't you tell us about Earthkeepers?
Sure, yeah. Global Ministries Earthkeepers is a program in which Global Ministries trains United Methodists to engage in environmental projects in their communities. We teach community organizing, anti-racism, project planning skills, and provide United Methodist resources like some of the ones I shared with you, and then help the participants plan a project that they can implement in their communities. They, in their project planning process, they learn to create a public narrative about who they are and what calls them to the work, who their community is, and what problem they see that they're trying to address. They reflect on the theological connections with the work they're trying to do, and they reflect on racism and how environmental justice is a component of their projects. And then they take their projects back to their communities and implement them. They develop timelines. In the last year, we have offered grants to support the projects. And it's been really exciting to see what people have been able to accomplish. Even amid the changes happening with COVID, we've seen folks who've really just been able to do great work.
Yeah. How long has the Earthkeeper program been around, and how is that? Why was that a priority for your work and for the board?
Yeah, the program has been around since 2016. It was started by a United Methodist missionary named Pat Watkins, Reverend Pat Watkins. And it began at a time when I think the board was taking stock of its environmental values. It was also around the time that they were making the decision from moving from New York to Atlanta, excuse me.
Right.
And they renovated Grace United Methodist Church in Atlanta, and renovated a wing to become a LEED Platinum certified building, the first LEED Platinum certified building to be built and occupied by a faith institution in the state of Georgia. And so it was a moment of beginning to recognize the ways in which how we live in the world intersect with the humanitarian aid we provide, and looking at how we might more deeply address that. I think it was also a time in the United Methodist Church when we were wrestling more with our work around climate. We had a significant divestment campaign, a fossil fuel divestment campaign, that wrapped up at General Conference in 2016, and I think there were more and more people kind of getting catalyzed around what is the church doing on environmental concerns. I joined Global Ministries in 2017 after Pat retired, and it's just been a joy to work with this program for the last 3 years.
Yeah. And tell me, we've talked a little bit about this, but obviously the work isn't just about environment, it's about people and environmental justice, and it's also about anti-racism now and the work that you're doing around that. You touched on that a little bit earlier, but tell us about what that's been like trying to incorporate anti-racism into the program, and how you've been able to do that, and why it's important for the program.
Yeah, when I first came to the program, I came from the Pacific Northwest, and which is a place that tends to be a little more liberal. And I felt like I really understood issues of race and intersections of race and environmental justice. And in my first month, I led a training, and there were microaggressions happening within the training where people were experiencing racism, and I realized I didn't have the skills I needed to address it as a facilitator. I did the best I could in the moment, but but I came out of that realizing that there's more complexity that I don't understand and I need to understand. And so I contacted colleagues at the Methodist Church's General Commission on Religion and Race, which is a terrific resource of the United Methodist Church, and found great help and great resources, both in thinking about how to facilitate groups and resources that I might be able to share with the participants. Because my experience was that many of the participants knew their intersections between racism and environmental concerns. Many of the folks who come to our trainings are able to name the ways in which people of color tend to experience more pollution, live in places that are sited near toxic waste sites, are disproportionately impacted by climate change and its impacts. But actually thinking about what that means for our individual everyday lives and acting in new ways because of it, and doing creation care ministry in our communities in new ways because of it, felt like something kind of out there rather than something that we could do work on right here, right now. And so so it's been a journey, first on working at the trainings with some of the resources from GCORE and facilitating conversations about race. We use resources like GCORE has a video by Robin DiAngelo, Dr. Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, a book that many people are picking up these days. And facilitating those conversations, I saw how much I still needed to learn about naming racism when I saw it, encouraging people to engage their resilience, and then also about the trauma that can happen for people of color in a room of white people trying to understand their privilege. And so I have continued to work with colleagues who are also working on these issues in other contexts, whether ministry or teaching, to try to better understand my role in dismantling racism, even in small interactions and small groups. And then also trying to figure out how to integrate anti-racism into the projects we do, and especially because we have started funding projects. So thinking about how can we better move financial resources into communities of color and put the power of decision making into the hands of people of color, so that we're not just funding projects in which things are being done to people of color in the hopes of saving them from these circumstances, but that we're actually listening to what people of color are saying they need, and helping them with the resources they need to respond to the serious situations they're facing.
Yeah, that's all really great. What are some things that you have found in doing this work for yourself that you would say, this is obviously lifelong work, especially for white people, on how to analyze this and be anti-racist intentionally over and over again? Where would you point people, white people who are interested in doing this work and figuring out, how do I be a better anti-racist, either in my personal life, in my faith community, in my work? Where would you kind of point them, and what would you say for people that are on that journey, or maybe just starting on that journey?
I think that I could start naming books, but I think there's a lot of book lists circulating around right now, and they're all the ones that are circulating around are great resources. And I think community is really important. I think that it is really important for white people to find other white people with whom they can wrestle about their understanding of race and racism. And with the Earthkeepers program, we're really trying to equip people not just to do projects, but to be leaders in their communities, which means they need to be able to speak about race and racism and name it when they see it happening. And that takes practice. And it's very likely, you might screw up. How's that? There's risk involved in talking about these matters because they are complex, and because as a white person, you are yourself, but you also represent whiteness in the world, and all of the things that come along with that. And so I think to have people with whom you can talk about what that means as you try to address racism, as you try to be in community, as you try to learn how to listen, really, really listen to what people are saying when they're experiencing oppression, when they're, and I think that like you said, it's lifelong work, and there's internal reckoning that happens over and over and over. You're not just going to read white fragility and be done. It's something that we have inherited, and that is going to take time to change. And if you think you've changed it really fast, you probably haven't done the work yet.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to reground kind of in the poem that you brought earlier. It sort of is that go beyond yourself again, over and over again. When you think that you have done what you need to do, there's surely more that you need to do.
Yeah, and I think
helpful.
too that as for people who do environmental work, many of us who have been engaged in this type of work for a lot of years are aware we're going to be doing this our whole lives. That this and there's a certain acceptance, not acceptance of the degradation and climate change that's happening, but just an acceptance that like this is a long road, and like the Israelites in the wilderness, like so many biblical stories of people who are working for future generations, like we can ground ourselves in this moment, knowing that we aren't expected to accomplish it all alone. And I think the same is true of the work of anti-racism, that part of the work is what we do now in our communities, and part of it is how we raise our children, and knowing that they will carry it on if we've done our job right.
Yeah. Could you talk about, so the Earthkeeper program, as I understand, and I could be wrong, it primarily focuses on lay leaders, is that correct?
No, it's actually lay and clergy.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask about, what's the importance and the intentionality for both training not just clergy, not just lay people, but doing both of them, and kind of what the value is for training multiple sets of leaders at different stages of the life of the church.
Gosh, I mean, it's just so important, I think, for clergy and lay leaders to be in dialogue about these issues, and I think that it's really valuable when you get in a room of folks, for clergy to be able to see and engage the passion of lay leaders around them, and see ways that people are leading in their congregations, to give them ideas for how to empower leadership in their own congregations. And I think it's really valuable for lay people to get to know clergy who are concerned about these issues, and better understand the obstacles that clergy face and what they need from lay people to be able to make change happen in a community.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what the differences have been? I love when a person moves from the Pacific Northwest to the Southeast. It's one of my favorite things. And I know that you also worked with one of our other colleagues, Leanne Barris, while you were out there and doing some of this work. And so, what are the differences in trying to do this work there versus trying to do some of the work here in local congregations? And maybe, I know that your program spans quite a bit larger than this state, but I think you probably have a good sense of what are maybe different particular environmental issues and challenges that we have here than maybe you had in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. In the Pacific Northwest, a big challenge I faced was the sense that we already know the environmental issues. We're already green, we're already environmentalists, and a sense that like the work is done. We have our kayaktivists, we have our light rail, and we're good. So that the call of that poem, just pushing people to be aware that they need to go just beyond themselves, that where they are is awesome, and they are providing leadership, and like the work isn't done yet, and there's still a lot that we need to do. Whereas here, there is less of that sense that the work is done. And so to me, it's interesting and fun. I really like engaging with communities that haven't thought much about environmental concerns, and hearing where they are it's just interesting. And because there is, I mean, living particularly in the Atlanta area, which tends to embrace environmental concerns more readily than some other parts of the state. There's interesting diversity at the margins, and beyond, and that's fun. I love talking with people who see the world differently than I do. I learned so much about what motivates people, how they understand their relationship with the earth, and that helps me do my ministry better.
Yeah. What do you see as some of the most common roadblocks or concerns for either, you know, clergy or lay leaders or congregations generally on kind of diving into some of these conversations? You know, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I wondered if there anything else that you wanted to add to that.
I mean, a big concern that I hear is just the sense of not wanting to take on another thing. Like, our ministry is stretched, we are doing so many things, we're doing really good work, but we don't have capacity for another thing. And I think the antidote to that is to examining ministry to see where existing ministries intersect with creation care. And invariably, they all have intersections in one way or another. One of the things we do in the Earthkeepers training is talk about 7 entry points to creation care ministry. So we talk about the intersections with worship, education, and I'm not going to remember them all, advocacy, witness, investment, and infrastructure. Like, those are the primary ministry areas of a faith community. And there are ways you can connect creation care into any of them. And so to make it not a separate thing, but actually just something that's part of who we are and what we do, can be really empowering.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I feel like I bump up against that a lot. That same sort of, especially congregations that are involved in doing a lot of stuff, can't do another thing. And the lie is to believe in this kind of scarcity mentality that everything's quite a different thing, and then you can only deal with a couple of things, and they're all kind of siloed. And the reality is they're all very connected, and there's a much more robust, kind of abundant way that you can look at. I appreciate your list of 7 entry points, because it sort of demonstrates, here are all the different ways that you can do it, and all of the subject areas that you might be interested in are likely intersecting, whether that's immigration or refugees or police brutality or environmental justice, or all those things are this part of the same system that you can work on. You don't have to kind of break it up into silos. You can have a much more robust tapestry.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, we're getting towards the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you, I will ask you 2 more questions. I don't want to leave without offering an opportunity to talk a little bit about Howard Thurman. So for those of you who are tuning in, Jenny and myself, as well as some of our board members and advisory council members, are currently reading Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited. So it's an incredible book that I would recommend to everybody on kind of the intersections of race, systems, and America of oppression. And also, I think for us, then trying to take that text and apply it to environmental concerns and the work that we do. And I'm curious, you know, for you, I've heard some of your reflections in our group, but after reading that text and then coming to the environmental work, what are some of the things that stand out the most for you about the work that Thurman does and how that might apply to the environmental work that we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he speaks deeply to the lives of the disinherited, of people who experience oppression and systems of hierarchy and power, and those systems are systems that oppress people and the earth, and then the oppression of the earth intersects with the oppression of people, and he speaks to the dehumanization of people in these power dynamics, and how that leads to disempowerment, and even death and fear of death. And I think all those things are factors in engaging the work of environmental justice. I think the thing I have been reminded of most in our conversations is how much more I need to understand the experiences of Black people to be able to really understand and hear what the role of an agency like Global Ministries is in relation to Black communities. I think that um, that he really speaks into the distance, the psychological distance between white communities and Black communities. And while his book was written decades ago, that I think that gap is still very present. And so I find myself reflecting on what more I can do to better listen.
Yeah, I'm struck by, I mean, we could have a 5-hour conversation on Jesus and the Disinherited, but the definition for the disinherited that Thurman gives is those who are pushed up against the wall. Who are those that are pushed up against the wall by the systems of society and have to react out of that? And it strikes me that the ways in which we treat the environment inevitably pushes some communities up against the wall further, and that we quite literally push the environment up against the wall all the time. And there's a lot of intersections between how those injustices perpetuate each other and the systems that bear down on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on this morning.
It's great to talk with you.
We'll close with the same question I've asked everybody who has come on since we started this, which is, what are you missing the most in this COVID-19 world? And what gives you hope to keep doing the work that you're doing in the midst of it?
I'm well, a couple things. One is my own face-to-face interaction with people, but also seeing my two children, their interactions with their friends and the joy of their play. Those are the things I miss the most. I think what gives me hope to keep on going with this work is just it is interesting to live through a response, such a visceral, in the moment response to a global crisis. There is, and when I think about climate change, we haven't had. We're all responding in different ways, right? Like there are folks who wear masks, don't wear masks, like, but to have this like global dialogue happening all together is fascinating in thinking about the work of what we need to do with the environment. And so it's exciting to see how people are in conversation, how the conversation is moving forward, and what's possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will end with a quote this morning, and I'll say I'm going to read a quote from John Lewis that has been circulated a lot since his passing and remembering of his legacy. And I was reminded of it because I was lucky enough, like many people, to brush shoulders with John Lewis in a March setting. And I remember it being so pivotal several years ago that it was such a kind of a hem of the garment moment. Like it felt very, here's this person with this great legacy who has done all this work, who's been marching their entire lives, and yet never stopped, was going to make time to come down to Atlanta to do these marches, to march with communities. And so I think that is, it says something about a lifelong grassroots organizing and ministry, I think, that is important for all of us in this work to think about. And so the quote that is probably familiar to many people, and I'll leave us with, is, do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. So perhaps the challenge to all of us is to go beyond ourselves a little bit, to get into some good trouble, to make some noise, and to know that we're in it for the long haul. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this morning. Thank you, Reverend Phillips, for being here.